The airstrikes are over. Maduro is in New York. The press conferences have moved on to the next story. But the Venezuela crisis hasn't ended. It's metastasizing. What started as a military operation.
This is becoming something nobody in Washington planned for. A direct confrontation between the United States and Russia over a single oil tanker. Not a missile strike. Not a declaration of war. Just one ship. 3 days ago, a Venezuelan-linked tanker fleeing U.S. forces in the Caribbean painted a Russian flag on its hull, changed its name from Bella 1 to Marinara, and re-registered under Russian Maritime Authority. Today, that same vessel sits 230 miles off the coast of Ireland, and Russia has dispatched a submarine and naval surface ships to escort it. This is what escalation actually looks like. Not dramatic, not immediate, but slow, methodical, and dangerous, a steady accumulation of tension that transforms a regional enforcement operation into something far more volatile. And that's why today matters. Because this is no longer about what happened last week in Venezuela. This is about what's unfolding right now across the Atlantic, along the Colombian border, and inside diplomatic rooms where governments are quietly choosing sides. This isn't about Nicolás Maduro anymore. This is about oil sanctions, maritime law, regional sovereignty, and whether the international system still has the ability to contain conflict, or whether those conflicts are now strong enough to fracture what little order remains. Let's walk through what's actually happening. On December 16th, President Trump announced what he called a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers traveling to and from Venezuela. Posting on Truth Social, he claimed Venezuela was completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. The language was dramatic. The reality was not. According to multiple tracking services, including tankertrackers.com, Windward Maritime AI, Bloomberg, and the New York Times, at least 16 oil tankers successfully evaded the blockade after Maduro's capture on January 3rd. 16. That's not an accident. That's coordination. Together, those ships carried roughly 4 million barrels of crude and fuel out of Venezuelan waters. Another 12 vessels, carrying an estimated 8 million barrels, were tracked departing ports in what analysts describe as a synchronized mass exit. Samir Madani, co-founder of tankertrackers.com, said the timing was unmistakable. These ships rushed out immediately after Maduro's capture. That kind of operation doesn't happen spontaneously. It only works if it's planned in advance and executed all at once. What we're witnessing isn't a functioning blockade, it's maritime hide-and-seek, and the hiders are very good at hiding. These ships belong to what intelligence agencies call the dark fleet, tankers that operate outside standard maritime regulations. They disabled their automatic identification system transponders, devices meant to broadcast location and speed, or spoof their signals entirely, making it appear they're thousands of miles away. Reuters estimates the global dark fleet now includes more than 1,400 tankers, with over 920 already sanctioned by the US, UK, or EU. Here's the problem. Only 40% of the dark fleet serving Venezuela is under US sanctions. That means 60%. Hundreds of ships fall outside the legal scope of Trump's blockade. So when Washington says it's enforcing a total blockade, what it's really doing is chasing a subset of vessels that were built specifically to avoid detection. The US has seized two tankers, the Skipper in mid-December, and the Centuries later that month. Both operations involved Coast Guard, maritime security teams, Marine Corps Special Operations Forces, helicopters launched from aircraft carriers, full-spectrum military assets. But the seizures out of dozens of departures isn't a blockade. It's a disruption. And that distinction matters. Venezuela's economy runs on oil. Nearly 90% of its export revenue comes from petroleum. If the blockade were truly effective, storage facilities would overflow, production would halt, and government revenue would collapse within weeks. But that's not happening. Production has slowed. Yes, some tankers are stuck. But oil is still moving. Money is still flowing. The system is adapting. Then came the ship that changed everything. The Marinara, formerly known as the Bella 1, is a VLCC, a very large crude carrier. These are floating cities of steel, previously registered in Panama. It was sanctioned by the US Treasury in 2024 for involvement in Iranian oil trading. As US forces closed in, its operators made a bold move. They repainted the hull, renamed the ship, reflagged it under Russia, and Moscow accepted. Russia officially recognized the Marinara as a Russian-flagged vessel operating under its protection. That changes everything. Seizing a ship flying a false flag is one thing. Seizing a ship legally registered under a recognized sovereign state is a diplomatic incident, potentially far worse. The Marinara was last tracked 230 miles off Ireland. US Coast Guard vessels were nearby. Navy P-8A Poseidon surveillance aircraft used for submarine hunting were flying patrols off Ireland and Scotland. KC-135 refueling tankers, C-130 transports, U-28 special operations aircraft. This wasn't routine monitoring. This was preparation. Then Russia responded. A submarine and surface naval vessels were dispatched to escort the tanker. Two U.S. officials confirmed it to CBS News. The Wall Street Journal broke the story first, and in that moment, a law enforcement operation became something else entirely. Now you have us and Russian military assets converging in the same space. Under incompatible orders, the United States wants to seize the tanker. Russia intends to prevent it. That's not a standoff. It's a live confrontation where a single miscalculation could spiral fast. When asked about the situation at Mar-a-Lago, President Trump said, "It's moving along. We'll end up getting it." But whether the U.S. actually attempts a seizure now with Russian forces present remains unclear. Plans can change. Operations can be shelved, and the Marinara may not be the last. According to Russia's own maritime registry, at least 3 other sanctioned tankers near Venezuela have recently switched to Russian flags. A pattern is emerging. Sanctioned ships seeking Russian protection, and Russia willing to provide it. Every future interdiction now risks becoming a geopolitical flashpoint. And while this unfolds at sea, tension is rising on land. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has mobilized forces along the 2,219-kilometer border with Venezuela. Troops deployed, emergency protocols activated, and then came the statement that reverberated across the region. An attack on Venezuela is an attack on Latin America. Colombia is a U.S. ally. It receives American military aid. But Petro, a former leftist guerrilla, has never aligned neatly with Washington. His move isn't symbolic. Colombia absorbs the fallout of Venezuelan instability, refugees, armed groups, drug routes. His message is clear. Colombia will not support actions that make those risks worse, and the region is listening. Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Chile, Spain, and Uruguay issued a joint statement condemning the operation. Not scattered responses, coordinated resistance. Brazilian President Lula called the strikes an unacceptable line and urged UN intervention. Mexico warned of regional destabilization. Chile emphasized international law. Spain rejected unilateral military actions. This coordination marks a shift. Latin America is no longer reacting individually. It's pushing back collectively. China is now the top trading partner for much of South America. Alternatives exist. Dependence on Washington is no longer absolute. And when the U.S. acts unilaterally, these countries can afford to say no. At the UN Security Council, Russia called the seizures piracy. China warned of threats to regional peace. Iran echoed the charge. Predictable, maybe, but credibility matters, and the U.S. is losing ground. When rules apply selectively, they stop being rules. The UN Secretary General expressed deep alarm, but functionally, nothing happens. The U.S. holds veto power. There are no consequences, only erosion of trust. Economically, the blockade is hurting Venezuela but not crippling it. Storage is filling, production is slowing, yet exports continue. China keeps buying. Oil markets remain calm because Venezuela's output is no longer decisive. But the precedent is, if sanctions enforcement becomes naval warfare in all but name, the system shifts. Traders see it, governments see it, everyone adapts. And amid all this, information warfare floods, social media, dramatic videos, unverified claims, recycled footage, some real, some not. In moments like this, verification matters more than virality. So where does this leave us? The Venezuela operation has outgrown its original intent. It's no longer contained. It's a naval standoff in the North Atlantic, a border crisis in Colombia, a unified regional backlash, a test of international law, and a demonstration of the limits of American power. The strikes are over. The consequences are just beginning. Somewhere in the Atlantic, a Russian submarine escorts an oil tanker while U.S. aircraft circle overhead. Both sides calculating, both sides committed, both sides hoping nothing goes wrong. That's where we are. That's the story, not the one from last week, the one unfolding right now.